In the final days of World War II, as the Third Reich crumbled and Soviet forces closed in from the east, the Nazis supposedly spirited away one of their most closely guarded secrets, a bell-shaped machine of unknown purpose that would become known to history, or perhaps to legend, as Die Glocke, the bell. This mysterious device, shrouded in darkness and whispered about in the decades that followed, represents one of the most tantalizing enigmas of the 20th century, a technological phantom that has captivated the imaginations of historians, engineers, and conspiracy theorists for over 70 years, yet remains maddeningly elusive, forever existing at the blurry intersection between documented history and speculative fiction, between what we can prove and what we desperately want to believe. But to understand Die Glocke, to separate the whispers from the truth, the legends from the facts, we must first journey into the heart of Nazi Germany's scientific ambitions, into the shadowy world of advanced weapons research and theoretical physics that drove the regime's desperate hopes for a miracle that could reverse the tide of war. We must ask ourselves the fundamental questions that have haunted researchers for decades. Did Die Glocke actually exist, or is it merely a phantom born from post-war rumors and the tendency of the human mind to create mysteries where none may actually exist? What concrete evidence do we have, and what remains pure speculation? And perhaps most importantly, what does our obsession with this Alice device tell us about ourselves and our relationship with history? The story begins not in 1945 but much earlier, in the years following the Nazi rise to power in 1933, when Adolf Hitler and his regime embarked on an ambitious and terrifying program to transform German science and technology into weapons of unprecedented power, believing that superior German engineering and scientific genius could overcome any obstacle and deliver final victory to the master race. The Nazis had inherited a strong scientific tradition from the Weimar Republic, and they were determined to harness it, redirect it, and weaponize it in ways that the world had never seen before. They invested enormous resources into experimental programs across multiple disciplines: rocket science, nuclear physics, psychological warfare, biological weapons, and countless other fields that operated in the shadows, away from international scrutiny, bound by absolute secrecy and guided by ideology as much as by scientific rigor. It was within this context that various technological programs emerged that would later become fodder for speculation and legend, including the famous V weapons, the rocket programs directed by Wernher von Braun and others, which did indeed produce real results and genuine terror weapons like the V-1 flying bomb and the V-2 ballistic missile that rained down on British cities. But beyond these documented and well-researched programs, there existed within Nazi Germany a kind of technological underworld, a realm of rumor and secret projects that remained largely unknown even to most Germans, let alone to the outside world. And it is in this murky realm that Die Glocke allegedly dwelt. The first serious post-war account of Die Glocke emerged from Igor Witkowski, a Polish journalist and author who, in the 1990s, claimed to have discovered information about the device in declassified Soviet documents and testimonies from portrayed Nazi scientists who had been captured and interrogated by the Soviets after the war. According to Witkowski's research, Die Glocke was allegedly a massive metallic bell-shaped object measuring approximately 9 meters in diameter and perhaps 12 meters in height, constructed from an exotic metal or metallic alloy of unknown composition, containing two counter-rotating cylinders filled with a strange liquid, substance that Witkowski claims was codenamed Zerum 525. The device allegedly produced effects that ranged from the merely exotic to the utterly fantastic. Some accounts suggested it could generate anti-gravity effects, others claimed it manipulated electromagnetic fields in unprecedented ways, and still others whispered that it was capable of opening rifts in space-time itself, though these last claims obviously venture far beyond anything that serious science could support. Witkowski claimed that Die Glocke was housed in a secret facility in the Silesian Mountains, a region in what is now Poland, in a facility codenamed the Henge or Der Hügel, and that the device was being tested and developed under the direction of SS scientists and engineers who had direct access to the regime's most advanced research capabilities and virtually unlimited resources to pursue their experimental ambitions. According to these accounts, The device was so dangerous, so powerful, and so destabilizing in its effects that even the Nazis themselves feared what they had created, and they allegedly took extraordinary measures to protect it, conceal it, and ensure that if they could not succeed in the war, at least the Allies would not be able to capture their terrible secret. When the Soviets finally overran the Silesian region in the final months of the war, so the legend goes, the Nazis destroyed Die Glocke to prevent its capture, allegedly moving it or destroying it in a final act of desperation. And the Soviets, who captured many Nazi scientists and scientific documents, somehow either failed to find any evidence of it or deliberately concealed what they found, adding another layer of mystery to the entire affair. Now, let us pause here and consider what we actually know and what we are merely speculating about, for this is where the story becomes significantly more complicated and intellectually honest. The historical record, carefully examined and cross-referenced, provides us with no verified contemporary documentation of Die Glocke. There are no Nazi documents that refer to it, no budgetary allocations that can be traced to its construction, no Nazi scientists who publicly discussed it during their lifetimes, and no contemporary photographs or blueprints that we can definitively attribute to it. The overwhelming majority of the claims about Die Glocke come from post-war sources, from captured Nazi scientists interrogated by the Soviets, from rumors that circulated among displaced persons in the chaos following Germany's defeat, and from interpretations of fragmented documents and testimonies that may or may not refer to the device at all. This is not to say that such sources are worthless. Eyewitness testimony can be valuable, and captured scientists often provided accurate information about German military projects. But it is to say that we must approach them with extreme skepticism and subject them to rigorous historical analysis, examining whether alternative explanations might account for the same evidence, whether sources have been reliably verified, and whether claims are consistent with the broader historical record and with the laws of physics as we understand them. Some historians and researchers have attempted to identify Die Glocke with known Nazi projects that actually did exist and were well documented, suggesting that perhaps the legend grew up around a real but misunderstood weapons program. One frequent suggestion is that Die Glocke might have been connected to German nuclear weapons research, which was indeed ongoing in Nazi Germany. Though historians generally agree that Germany's nuclear program lagged behind that of the Allies, and that Nazi Germany never came particularly close to producing an atomic bomb, despite having access to many of the theoretical breakthroughs that made such weapons possible. The primary reason for this failure was not a lack of scientific knowledge, but rather a combination of resource allocation decisions, the loss of key Jewish scientists who fled Nazi persecution, disruptions caused by the war itself, and the fact that German scientific leadership did not always appreciate the military potential of nuclear weapons research or provide it with adequate resources and priority. Another theory suggests that Die Glocke might have been some kind of advanced electromagnetic or plasma weapon, drawing on certain Nazi research into unconventional physics that did occur in various institutes. Though again, the leap from such theoretical research to an actual functioning device remains vast and undocumented. Some researchers have speculated that Die Glocke was an aeronautical project, perhaps connected to the German development of advanced aircraft or experimental flying machines, and there were indeed numerous Nazi aircraft projects that were exotic and experimental, ranging from the Me-163 Comet rocket fighter to various vertical takeoff designs and experimental aircraft that existed only in blueprint form. Yet others have suggested that the entire Die Glocke legend might be a conflation of multiple projects or even a deliberate Soviet disinformation campaign designed to make the Nazis seem more technologically advanced and terrifying than they actually were, thereby justifying Soviet capture of German scientists and resources as a necessary defensive measure against superior Nazi technology. What is most troubling about the Die Glocke legend from a historical perspective is how it illustrates the human tendency to construct elaborate narratives around fragments of evidence and uncertainty, filling the gaps in our knowledge with speculation, ideology, and wishful thinking. Or perhaps in this case, a kind of dark fascination with the alleged technological power of the Nazi regime. The Nazis themselves deliberately cultivated an image of themselves as holders of esoteric and advanced knowledge drawing on pseudoscientific racial theories, occult symbolism, and the mythology of Aryan superiority to bolster their claims to power and legitimacy. After the war, this mystique persisted in the popular imagination, and stories of secret Nazi superweapons and technological marvels became enduring elements of post-war culture, appearing in novels, films, and pseudo-historical accounts that blended fact with fiction in ways that were often difficult for general audiences to disentangle. The Die Glocke legend taps into all of these currents: the mystique of Nazi technology, the allure of lost secrets, the excitement of hidden knowledge, and the very human desire to believe that there is more to history than what we have been officially told, that somewhere in the shadows there are truths waiting to be discovered by those brave or clever enough to find them. But when we subject the Die Glocke claims to rigorous historical and scientific scrutiny, the evidence supporting its actual existence becomes remarkably thin. No credible scientific mechanism has ever been proposed for how such a device could function in a manner consistent with both Nazi era technology and the laws of physics. The alleged Serum 525 inches liquid is entirely speculative and has never been identified or documented in any authenticated Nazi source. The descriptions of the device and its alleged effects are inconsistent across different accounts, suggesting either fabrication or Chinese whisper style distortion of original claims. Many of the scientists who allegedly worked on Die Glocke projects were never rigorously cross-examined on the specifics of their claims, and some accounts come from sources that would have limited access to classified information about such programs. Furthermore, if such a device had actually been built and tested, we would expect to find physical evidence or at minimum substantial corroborating testimony from multiple independent sources, yet we find neither. What we do find, scattered throughout the historical record, are references to various Nazi weapons programs, experimental devices, and scientific research that was genuinely impressive for its time and context, even if it fell short of the fantastical achievements attributed to it in legend. German scientists were indeed working on advanced rocketry, on nuclear physics, on radar technology, on jet propulsion, and on countless other cutting-edge technologies of the era. The SS was indeed involved in directing and controlling certain scientific research, particularly in the horrifying field of concentration camp medical experiments, where SS doctors conducted unspeakable tests on helpless prisoners in the name of science. The German military-industrial complex was indeed vast and capable of marshalling enormous resources toward ambitious technological programs. The final months of the war in Europe were indeed chaotic, with vast quantities of documentation destroyed, material scattered, and vast armaments lost or concealed. All of these documented facts provide a context in which the Die Glocke legend might have grown, but none of them actually prove that Die Glocke itself existed. Rather, they explain how such a legend could emerge from the confusion, chaos, and fragmentary evidence of the post-war period. As we examine the larger historical narrative of Nazi scientific achievement and failure, a more nuanced and realistic picture emerges than the one suggested by Die Glocke mythology. The Nazi regime was indeed ambitious and ideologically driven in its approach to science and technology, but it was also plagued by inefficiency, duplication of effort, political infighting between various state agencies and party factions, and the fundamental impossibility of overcoming the material and industrial limitations of a nation at war against overwhelming global opposition. Nazi Germany developed impressive weapons and cutting-edge technologies in some areas but lagged dangerously behind in others, particularly in areas where the regime's ideological commitments conflicted with scientific reality. The expulsion of Jewish scientists had severely damaged German physics and chemistry. The regime's rejection of quantum mechanics as Jewish science hampered theoretical physics, and the diversion of resources to grandiose and impractical weapons programs sometimes came at the expense of more practical military technologies. The real story of Nazi technological ambition is fascinating and historically important precisely because it is complex, mixed, and ultimately more humanly understandable than the image of all-powerful and all-knowing Nazi scientists wielding godlike technological power. It is a story in which capable engineers and scientists worked within systems of control and ideology, in which impressive achievements existed alongside ridiculous failures, in which genuine innovation competed with wasteful fantasy, and in which the regime's material limitations ultimately constrained what could be achieved, no matter how brilliant the minds or how much ideological fervor drove the effort. The Die Glocke legend in this context might be understood not as a suppressed truth, but as a kind of screen onto which posted observers have projected various anxieties and fascinations about Nazi Germany, about the power of technology, about the possibility of hidden knowledge and secret history, and about our own modernist assumption that history might contain incredible secrets waiting to be revealed. It is a story that tells us as much about ourselves and our culture as it does about Nazi Germany, revealing our appetite for mystery and our willingness to believe in extraordinary claims if they are sufficiently exotic and exciting. The role of the internet and popular media in perpetuating and amplifying the Die Glocke legend cannot be overlooked either. For in the decades following the initial accounts by Igor Witkowski, this story has been picked up and elaborated upon by countless websites, documentary films of dubious credibility, and popular authors seeking to cash in on public interest in Nazi secrets. Each retelling adds new details, new claims, and new interpretations, and the original fragmentary and speculative accounts have calcified into something that many people now accept as historical fact despite the absence of rigorous verification. Television documentaries and streaming services have presented dialogue stories with dramatic music and reenactments that lend an air of verisimilitude to what remains fundamentally unproven speculation. And in the process, they have contributed to a popular understanding of history that is often at odds with what serious historical scholarship actually tells us. This is not merely an academic concern, for our understanding of history shapes how we understand ourselves and our world, and when popular accounts of history are substantially divorced from evidence and historical reality, the consequence is a public that is more easily misled about both the past and the present. The persistent appeal of the Die Glocke legend also raises important questions about how we engage with the history of World War II and Nazi Germany more broadly. There is something almost seductive about the idea that the Nazis had access to secret knowledge or hidden technologies that we do not fully understand, for it preserves a kind of mysterious allure around the most destructive and evil regime of the 20th century. It allows us to imagine that the Nazi defeat was not inevitable, that had they possessed such technologies or that had they deployed their known technologies more effectively, history might have turned out differently. But this kind of thinking is ultimately ahistorical and dangerous, for it underestimates the real historical forces that led to Nazi Germany's defeat and overestimates the power of technology divorced from broader military, political, economic, and social factors. Germany lost the Second World War not because it lacked secret superweapons, but because it was defeated militarily by a global alliance of nations with greater resources, greater industrial capacity, superior military strategy in many respects, and ultimately greater determination to resist Nazi conquest and ideology. The real history of the Second World War is dramatic and compelling enough without adding layers of speculation about impossible technologies. The genuine achievements of German scientists and engineers, the real struggles and innovations of the war, the authentic heroism and sacrifice of those who fought against Nazi tyranny, these are stories worthy of our attention and understanding, and they do not require embellishment with fictional technologies to be meaningful or important. Yet, despite all of the skepticism and all of the lack of evidence, the Die Glocke legend persists and likely will continue to persist because it feels a fundamental human need for mystery and for the possibility that there is more to reality than what appears on the surface. It provides a narrative framework into which people can insert their own speculations and theories. It offers the possibility of hidden knowledge and hidden truth, and it grants a kind of romantic allure to the past that mundane documented historical reality sometimes lacks. There is nothing inherently wrong with finding history fascinating or with speculating about what might have been, as long as we are clear about the difference between documented fact and speculation, between history and fiction, between what we know and what we merely imagine. What is problematic is when speculation hardens into false certainty, when imaginative reconstructions are presented as documented history, and when the line between entertainment and education becomes so blurred that audiences cannot distinguish between them. For those genuinely interested in the real history of Nazi Germany's scientific programs, there is much to learn from documented sources, from the testimonies of actual Nazi scientists who worked on known programs, from captured documents and Nazi records, and from the scholarship of serious historians who have dedicated themselves to understanding this dark period of history with accuracy and rigor. The study of history at its best is not a process of confirming what we already believe or want to believe, but rather a process of constantly challenging our assumptions, questioning our sources, and following evidence wherever it leads, even when it contradicts our preconceptions or denies us the satisfaction of a neat and dramatic story. Die Glocke, whatever its actual status in history, whether as a real but heavily mythologized project, as a complete fiction, or as something that existed in some limited form that bears little resemblance to the legend that has grown up around it, serves as a useful case study in how we construct historical narratives, in how we separate fact from speculation, and in how we might approach the study of history with greater care, rigor, and intellectual honesty. The real dark power that shaped World War II was not some mystical technological device, but rather the combination of ideological fanaticism, military aggression, industrial capacity, and the willingness of millions to support or acquiesce to tyranny and genocide. Understanding how that came about, how the Second World War actually happened, and how nations and individuals responded to these extraordinary circumstances is a far more important and urgent historical task than speculating endlessly about alleged secret weapons. The legend of Die Glocke will undoubtedly continue to circulate, to evolve, and to captivate the imaginations of those fascinated by alternative history and hidden secrets. And perhaps that is not entirely unhealthy, as long as we remember to ground our fascination with careful thinking, with respect for evidence, with intellectual humility, and with the recognition that the actual documented history of World War II contains more than enough drama, tragedy, heroism, and compelling human stories to satisfy our hunger for understanding without needing to venture into the realm of unsubstantiated legend. So, what did you think of this exploration of Die Glocke and the persistent legends surrounding Nazi Germany's technological ambitions? Did it change how you think about these claims, or do you remain convinced that there is something to the Die Glocke story? I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts and perspectives on this complex and controversial topic. So please leave a comment below, sharing your views, your questions, or any additional information you might have about the subject. If you found this investigation into history, evidence, and the nature of historical knowledge interesting and thought-provoking, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into historical mysteries, documented events, and the ways that we construct and understand the stories of our past. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.